Welcome to The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis, and we're podcasting to you from HCC TV at Houston Community College. If you're watching us on YouTube or social media or HCC TV, you can download all of the audio versions of our podcasts at hccs.edu/podcasts, and we're also on Apple Podcasts as well. Very excited about this show. We have this show is meant to show you a side of the news angle that you didn't necessarily see on TV, radio, or print back then. A look back at the city over the last 30 or so years, and I'm excited to have my next guest on with me. Cynthia Cisneros was with ABC 13 for more than 30 years. You had a chance to see her on television news. For decades, many of us watched Cynthia reporting on all types of stories, from hurricanes and floods to the Enron debacle. In 2012, she made the transition to move to the Vice President of Community Affairs, and just recently, Cynthia retired, and she's starting a brand new chapter in her life. Thanks for being here on the show.
Thanks, Todd. It's good to be here. I have a question for you. Am I that old?
We're all that old. Because we're going to talk about our time out in the field. We spent many hours sitting in live trucks in hot weather as news stories were going on. I wanted to ask you, first off, making the jump from news to behind the camera and into public affairs. Talk to me, because I made the jump several years ago into the public relations field. You went into public affairs, which is very similar. What was that like for you?
Well, you say a jump behind the scenes. Really, as you know firsthand, it ends up still being in front of the camera.
Sure.
Because there's still so much that we can do with social media that we do to help with our community engagement. So it was a very natural and logical step forward for me, in that when you're in news, you are serving the community. You are doing outreach, you're meeting people, and you're telling their story. And you're also, it's your reputation. You are being trusted to tell these very compelling and unique stories. So when it came time for community engagement, then that was to me a logical step, because I was still being trusted to go out and tell unique stories within our communities, our many diverse communities. But instead of being news driven, it was driven for community engagement, meaning engaging people for our many community drives, our marketing drives, our drives that are led by our parent company, Disney. So it was really all of that coming together at the perfect time for me.
You know, it's a natural transition for many of us, because you have those contacts, you have the news background, you know what people are looking for on TV, and you also know what the PR folks are looking for as well. So I guess you're able to use all of that when you go into this role, and that's why it's a natural for many folks who are news reporters to jump into PR or public affairs.
It's a natural. It's just something that happens. You don't really realize how natural that step is until you start making that inroad. So no, you're not filing stories every day, but you are still in the community every day, meeting those new community members, making sure that our diverse communities have a seat at the table at ABC 13, and they are treated with open arms to engage and to be respected, and also to help in our many campaigns, whether it's feeding people or clothing people or getting kids ready for school. This is how you really do that hard work of community engagement and making sure that you are serving as well as informing.
And the public knows you as well, which helps. You know, even after I left news for many years, people would come to me at the grocery store and say, I haven't seen you recently. Where have you been? I mean, it's been 12 years, but you know, they remember that, and that helps you with establishing those relationships.
Well, you know, I get just the opposite. I get people that come up to me and say, oh, you know, I saw that story that you just did. And well, that was years ago since I've done a television news story. So I've always found it best not to argue with people, because you'll just lose, because they're convinced they saw you.
Which is flattering that they remember you and they have that connection with you. A lot of folks will ask me too, and I'll ask you this. Do you miss being out on the street and running after that story? I miss it at times, but what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's definitely... It takes a certain skill set, and it takes a certain mindset. Not everyone can be a journalist. Not everyone is suited for that. It takes a certain type of mentality to be able to go out on the streets every day and meet people and really get those stories. So while my job is that I had after that in community engagement was very similar, it was different in that I wasn't on TV every single day telling a news story. So that component of it, I honestly did not miss.
Right.
Because I had been doing it my entire life.
Sure.
So there's the time in Channel 13, but then there was also the time in all those small markets that I worked in for several years. So when you spend your adult life in front of the camera, it's time to now go into a different aspect, which is behind the camera. I honestly did not miss it that much because people still saw me and I could still use my reputation and my face, if you will, to a much deeper level, which was community engagement.
Let's go back because you were talking about your time before Channel 13 for just a few moments. Tell me about those small markets you were in, because folks may or remember you for 30 years at Channel 13. But where were you before? I know you met your husband in one of those smaller markets.
Oh,
and y'all
small
came
market
here.
city.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, you know, you have to make that decision when you start out. You graduate with your journalism degree and you've got your diploma
Sure.
under your arm and you're ready to hit the world running and
Get that job.
get that first job. And I always wanted to stay in Texas. So I worked in East Texas in small markets. I worked in Tyler, in Longview. I did take about 6 months to work in Bakersfield, California, which was very interesting because who knew that I would meet and interview Cesar Chavez?
Wow. Yeah.
So it's that long ago, folks. He was still alive.
Wow.
But his work was still very much underway. And being from Texas, I really didn't have that in my wheelhouse I kind of knew who he was, but I didn't really understand or know the work he was doing for migrant workers' rights and all that had been done and still needed to be done. And I met Dolores Huerta, and I was able to really understand from that aspect in Southern California how important that work was and how it translated to here in Texas, because we certainly have a large, viable migrant labor force that
Sure.
is still very vibrant here. So I met him, and I did a series of interviews with him. Who knew that it would end up on remember videotapes, folks, that it would end up on a videotape to be played at a national convention that television news directors would attend, and television general managers and news directors, they attended every year. And back then, I guess they just had a display of tapes that would just be running. And the president of ABC News West, because back then ABC was divided into
Right.
East and West, somehow Texas was West, he saw me.
Isn't that amazing?
And it was as
how that
simple
happened?
as,
Yeah.
who's that girl? I want to talk to her. Let's bring her in. So I get this call from Houston saying, would it be convenient for you to come do an interview at KTRK Houston? We're interested in hiring you as a reporter.
Wow.
Oh, I felt like screaming because I'm
I
from
know, yeah.
Houston
You
and
get
I
that break,
was in
yeah.
California and I really wanted to
Sure.
get back. And I did. And it was that simple. But it was those stories that I did
Right.
with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta that really told a story, an important story. And little did I know that those important stories would continue as I came to Houston.
You know, I had a similar story, and I'm going to tell you about that because it also involves a station I went to work with here in Houston as well. We'll talk about that in a second, and I want to talk about some of your favorite stories and some of them that we kind of cross paths out in the field. You're watching The Story Behind the Story. We're interviewing Cynthia Cisneros here today, former ABC 13 reporter and Vice President of Community Affairs. She's retired now, but she's telling us all about her career. We'll have you back with more. I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll see you in a few moments.
HCC. So many classes, so little tuition. Register today at hccs.edu/now.
Welcome back to The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis, and we're talking today with Cynthia Cisneros, former reporter with ABC 13. She's retired now, loving life, and here to tell it all on the show. Thanks again for being here.
I'm happy to be here, Todd.
You were talking about how one interview with Cesar Chavez changed your life.
Yes.
And it's amazing how these things happen. When I was at University of Houston, I went to a forum, a luncheon more or less.
When you were at UH as a student.
As a student,
Yes.
That's right. And I just went, I was told by one of the classes, go there, you have a good chance of networking. I sat next to a lady, started talking to her for a while, and she asked what I did, told her what a major was, and she said, well, you know, I'm the assistant news director over at Channel 26. When you were looking for an internship, give me a call. So she gave me her card. Her name was Denise Bishop. You know that name
I know her well,
very
yeah.
well. And long story short, years down the road, I went to work for Fox 26 as a reporter and as an intern and a helicopter reporter and all that stuff because of that chance meeting. It's very similar, I guess, to what happened with them seeing your tape at Channel 13 with interviewing Cesar Chavez.
Very similar, and who knew?
Yeah,
I
right.
had just gotten married, and I really wasn't sure of what that next step was going to be, and here it fell into my lap. And next thing I know, I'm back at home in Houston on Channel 13, the station that I watched as a
All the
kid,
time.
working with people that I had just seen on TV and I
Right.
thought were on the level of movie stars. I just was that enamored with them. And here I am working with them as colleagues. And
Absolutely.
so that was mind-blowing in itself, and it took a lot to get used to.
I'm going to ask you about a couple of those movie stars. Marvin Zindler. What was it like working with Marvin?
I got to say, I miss Marvin Zindler every day. Every day. And that's saying a lot.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people, but I miss him every single day. He was that much of an influence. He was the same person that you saw on TV
Right.
as you saw in person, which translates into be genuine. If you want people to believe in you and to trust you with their stories, then you need to be genuine and authentic. And Marvin was just that. He certainly had his own style.
Yeah.
He had his own way of doing things that don't necessarily lend itself to television in modern terms. But at that time, he was certainly a character and someone that I really enjoyed being around, and I learned a lot from him. The number one thing I learned was don't pretend to know something you don't know.
Sure.
So sometimes when you're on live TV, the anchors like Dave Ward will ask you questions and you're supposed to give this honest and true answer about things that are happening, you know, as you see them. But you may not know all the answers to the questions that the anchors are asking. And it's okay to say that you don't know the answer.
Right.
So you can say things like, we're looking into that, and that's the question that authorities are looking into now. But never pretend that you know something you don't know, and that's certainly, it's a rookie mistake.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was something that I learned from Marvin years and years ago.
Now, I've got to get into some of the stories that were covered over the years by you. We talked about a few before we went on the air. And I've got to say, I used to always see Cynthia out in the field because her husband is a live truck engineer for Fox 26. And he would be running our live truck, and I'd be working on a story. Next thing you know, she'd pop up at the live truck, and we'd start talking. And a lot of times, our paths did cross out in the fields.
Yes.
Let's talk about a few of the stories that we covered while out there. And the first one I want to talk about, which really struck you, and we were some of the first reporters out there, but the Andrea Yates story, which happened in the Clear Lake area.
This is the mother from Clear Lake who was accused and later tried and convicted of drowning her 5 children in the bathtub.
Right.
It was certainly a horrific case.
And you didn't really know going out there. I was told it was just a drowning that happened in Clear Lake. 5 children were involved. We had very little information. And we were the first TV reporter on the scene because we just happened to be nearby. We weren't that far away. And then everyone started showing up and the details started coming out.
Well, we were on a different story, and our assignment desk called us and said, we need you to go to this address in Clear Lake. 5 children have drowned, and authorities think it was the mother. And I remember very clearly saying, children, do you mean puppies?
Right.
Because no, he said babies. And I said, babies, you mean puppies? And they said, no, children. And I remember at that moment, it was such a horrific story, something I had never in my mind thought of.
Yeah.
I could not imagine. And I remember at that point making a conscious decision to say, well, these aren't children, it's puppies. We're going down for 5 puppies. But of course, as you're driving down, the updates are coming in, the calls are coming in, and you know what it is, and you know what police are now investigating. But I remember all those years ago being so horrified that I chose, in that instant, I chose to not believe it. Just couldn't be. It had to be something other than children. Those are the kind of stories that really make the mark on you.
And you take that home with you at night, or at least I did, and you have to get aside with it, and then of course you turn the TV on that night to see what the latest details are, and it just.
Well, I remember not going home.
Yeah.
I remember going there to cover the story. Then next thing you know, I get a call from the producer saying, well, we need someone to do the network live shots.
Right.
You've only been there 13 hours. Do you mind doing that for the next 7 hours?
Yeah.
So we literally spent the afternoon, the night, that early morning into the morning shows. So it was just about 24 hours that we were there going live and giving updates and just piecing together this horrible story that would soon grip an entire nation. And
it really did, because people would hear more and more about the details. And I remember the first time I saw her picture, because they showed me the videotape of her, and you imagined her to be this monster, and it was this woman that looked lost.
She looked like any neighbor.
It looked like any neighbor. And that would, I think, to me, being the reporter on the scene, was one of the most shocking things, is seeing her and then hearing what it was done.
So as journalists, we're not there to judge. We're not there to give our opinion. We're there to report what we know at that time. And as the case moved through the court system, we began to see another side to the story, which was her mental state. And that was something that was equally as gripping and compelling, was to really find out that mental state that she had been experiencing.
Right.
And we were able to learn more about that through her attorney that was representing her in the court case. So it's not just...
Well, the family dynamics went on too were very
first
bizarre.
And foremost are the victims.
Right. Sure.
Number one, the victims. Number two, you start progressing into the story. What's going on, the family dynamic, what's going on in that mental state. And then you're just learning more, and it's a very complicated piece of fabric that has many different threads to it. And I remember learning so much covering that story.
Right. I want to talk about another major story. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, I want something that you and I talked a lot out in the field, and we got to be friends covering the story, was the Enron debacle. So we're going to come back and talk about that. And we're speaking with Cynthia Cisneros, former Channel 13 reporter. For 30 years, she was with 13. She's retired now, and she's here on the story behind the story. I'm Todd Duplantis. I'll be back in a moment.
HCC. So many ways to learn, so little tuition. Register today at hccs.edu/now.
I've seen people's lives change just by attending a class at HCC.
Some of them might not have the financial means to go to a four-year university. That doesn't make them any less quote-unquote smart than the kids who go to a four-year school.
HCC is easy to get to. It's easy to apply and easy to become a part of.
It gave me so much confidence.
Once you finish your 2 years there, you can transition into a four-year university or go into the workforce.
It's affordable, it's accessible, it changes lives.
HCC. So many reasons, so little tuition. Register today at hccs.edu/now.
Welcome back to The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis. We're with Cynthia Cisneros, former Channel 13 reporter and former Vice President of Public Affairs at Channel 13. Thanks again for being with us.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Todd.
We're talking about stories we covered back in our journalistic days.
So
and
many stories.
Lots of them. But one of them that really stood out, Enron. And we spent many days covering that debacle. Your thoughts on the coverage of that and your time spending out there in the field?
Well, as you know, Enron was a very complicated story
It was.
involving many different people on many different levels. But it all boiled down to one fact. Did Enron lie to their investors about their progress they were making as a company? And once the federal prosecutors just boiled it all down to that, you could see those lights go on in the jury eyes. You know, click, 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 click. Now I get it. And I remember interviewing one of the jurors, asking, this was for the Ken Lay trial, and
Right.
why did you convict Ken Lay? And one of the jurors said, well, he invented this very complicated mathematical algorithm about how to determine profits and loss and gains, and he invented it, and he used it. It was used throughout the company and many other companies. And he was on the stand for over a day explaining it. And then at the very end, the juror says, well, it all came down to that he was so knowledgeable about this mathematical creation that how could someone who knew that much about it not know what was going on in the company? Because he also testified that he was unaware of certain things that were happening. And she said, well, if he knew that much about it, it just didn't make sense that he didn't know about this other things that were going on. So really, people think they're smarter than the jury or they're smarter
Right.
than the police. And I think that is a trial that I'll always remember, where the jurors really listened to the testimony and were able to make that decision.
I want to ask you more or less about current times. I know we're in the political season. We've got a huge mayoral race coming up here, and then a huge presidential race about a year from now. You took part in planning many debates
Yes.
with candidates. What are some of the things you learned from that, and some of the things that you don't see them doing now with other, let's say, other outlets?
Well, I just can speak from the ABC 13 aspect of it. We were partners in civic engagement with Univision 45 because we knew from the beginning that the debates should reach out to a bilingual market. Houston, as you know, is majority Hispanic, and of the Hispanic population, a majority of that are Spanish-speaking. So it made sense to reach out to that Spanish-speaking market. So we're very proud that we were able to organize a myriad of debates, not just mayoral debates, but debates that were important for congressional seats and Senate seats that are important to our area. What we learned is that you really need to make sure that you are capable of organizing,
Right.
because it all comes down to making that calendar work. So you've got all these people, you make sure that you can find a date, a venue, and that you really work hard to make sure that the questions asked are relevant and are also representative of the population. So it's not hard to do, but it takes a lot of effort, and you can't. You have to be able to juggle all those balls, and you have to be able to make sure that you are representing people, the constituency.
Right.
Where is the district that this debate is representing? Are you asking questions relevant to that district?
Do you find, because I get asked by people all the time, like, what did you think of this debate? The critiques I hear, or the criticisms I should say, is the questions weren't proper for the candidates, or the candidates were giving not a right amount of time to answer those questions. Some candidates would get more time. How do you rein all that in?
Well, you have to be diligent. You have to say that every answer gets this amount of time, every rebuttal gets this amount of time. And rebuttals are tricky because every candidate thinks they deserve a rebuttal.
Right.
So that we leave up to our moderators, and the moderators are given strict instructions that it cannot be every single time. It has to be, you have to use your best judgment as a journalist. So if one candidate calls out another candidate, that would be an appropriate rebuttal time. But the candidates, they are all about timing. So if you say you're given this much time and they're given cue cards to say, okay, now you've got 30 seconds, now you've got 10 seconds, they'll hit their mark because they're very adept at public speaking. So you really want to be able, this debate format is to give a presentation of thoughts and ideas. And that's what you really want to hit the high points. You want to be engaging, and you want to make sure that you're asking questions that are relevant to the district and to the voter.
Do you see that being done in a wide array?
You're going to get me in
debates?
trouble, Todd.
I'm just
I
gonna
really
ask
don't
you,
want to call out our competitors.
I don't want to call out any station or any
All I want to
news
say-
agency, but do you see that these rules that you told me? Do you see that being followed?
All I can say is that when a political debate is hosted by ABC 13 and Univision 45, the candidates pick up the phone and they make themselves available. Why they do that, I'll let you answer that.
Right,
but
sure.
They understand and know what they're going to be in for, that it's going to be professional and that it's going to be fair, nonpartisan. And they, as I said, make themselves available for that.
We've got a huge.
I'm not calling out a particular
No,
station,
no,
you guys.
and I don't expect you to. But we've got a huge mayoral race. Can you remember in recent, last 20 years, a mayoral race that's been as contested or as controversial as the one we have coming up?
You got to go back to 20, 30 years ago, but it's been, in my mind, I can't recall an incumbent mayor having such competition. Usually, when you're an incumbent, it's a landslide to be reelected.
We haven't had a one-term mayor in many, many years here in Houston.
This time around, it's very different.
Right.
And so I don't think I've seen that kind of a contention before in a mayoral race with an incumbent.
Cynthia Cisneros, former ABC reporter. You recognize her, of course. I've seen her for the last 30 years on air. We wish you the best of luck in your next chapter of life. I know this won't be the last time folks will see you on TV. I have a feeling we'll be seeing you in the future, whether it's here or somewhere else. Thanks for sharing your time with us today.
My pleasure, Todd. Thank you, and thank you all for watching.
Yeah, thanks for watching us on The Story Behind the Story. I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll see you next time.